Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm here with my colleague, Myles Brown, and he's going to be talking to you about AWS data and analytics for 2025. And this is going to be a very exciting session. If you've ever seen Myles do a webinar or a training, you are in for a treat. But you're also in for another treat because we are unveiling something today. We want to welcome you to Ascendient Learning. Ascendient Learning is built on the vast experience of Accelebrate, ExitCertified, and WebAge solutions. And as of Monday, we are combining forces and we will be on one site, ascendientlearning.com. This is not available for the public yet. You're getting a little sneak preview of what this is going to look like. So if you do try to go to the Accelebrate, ExitCertified, or WebAge solution site, come Monday, you will be redirected here to Ascendient Learning, and we're really excited about it. We've got a really cool new look and feel, but we will still be delivering the same white glove training solutions for our clients. And that includes vendor authorized courses and our own custom build classes that we write and deliver in-house, upskilling programs for entire organizations, customized courses for teams, public courses for individuals, and we have a vast array of technologies, including AI, machine learning, data science, programming languages, cloud technologies, agile DevOps, and the vendor authorized courses for certifications. We still have our partnerships with them, VMware, IBM, Microsoft, NVIDIA, and of course, AWS, which we're going to be talking about. So if you're here today, you're probably interested in AWS data and analytics. We do have a lot of training courses for them. If you want to check it out, I've got a URL up at the top. I will put it in the chat. If you go there after Monday, don't worry, you'll be redirected to the right place. And we are an AWS advanced tier training partner. That will not change. And we're very proud that WebAge Solutions, part of Ascendient Learning, was named AWS Training Partner of the Year for 2024 in the Americas. And if you think I'm just making it up, well, there's our own Timothy Toomey and Greg Wagner accepting the award. But let's meet Myles. Okay. Myles is the Director of Solution Engineering. He's got over 25 years of experience in the IT industry. He is a recognized AWS authorized instructor and also a Google Cloud professional architect. I guess one wasn't just, enough. He had to get both cloud. But he really is a wonderful instructor. And not only that, he's probably one of the most knowledgeable people I've ever met about cloud technologies in general. And if you get him on the phone and because you're interested in a training program, he is wonderful at breaking down what you need and pointing you in the right direction to get you where you need to go. All right, well, without further ado, let's Myles go ahead, take it away and dazzle everyone with AWS.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ann. As Ann mentioned, a lot of times these days I'm helping our salespeople when they get into deep technical discussions with people. So I'm not teaching classes every day. I still teach probably one class a month, but mostly AWS, like Man said, a little bit of Google Cloud, and various other technologies. Today, though, we're going to certainly talk about AWS. Uh, I put up a video on my LinkedIn that got a lot of views back in December when I was at AWS reInvent, and I was sort of talking about, they revealed a lot of new things in the data and analytics side, which is sort of my expertise. And so I said, well, I'll wait until the new year and I'll come out with a webinar where I kind of wrap up all the stuff that's new. And so that's what today is going to be. It is very much a webinar. So we don't have like a regular virtual class where you got two-way audio and video. We want to open it up to as many people as possible. So if you have questions, you can just throw them in the chat it to the host and panelists. That goes to me. And then I'll probably respond to everybody because it might be a question everybody has. But that's the way we'll deal with it. I'll keep sort of one eye on the chat. I may not get to your question right away, but certainly by the end, we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A. But what I thought we would do today is start with a quick review of the AWS data and analytics services, and then kind of break down by service what's new. Most of these things happened either at reInvent, which was the first week of December, or maybe a couple weeks before, or the couple weeks after. So it's sort of all the newer stuff, not everything, but just the highlights. That's what I wanted to go for here. And we'll talk about some storage stuff, mostly S3 stuff, and then we'll get into databases, both relational and non-relational, some changes to database migration service, and then we'll get into the heavy-duty analytics stuff, Glue, Flink, QuickSight, SageMaker, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. So if I'm reviewing the data analytics services of AWS, AWS really pushes this idea these days of a modern data strategy, where at the heart of things is a data lake. And then you've got your traditional relational databases. Maybe you've got NoSQL databases. Maybe you got MongoDB or Cassandra or whatever it is. You've got maybe a traditional data warehouse in the cloud. In AWS, it's probably Redshift, but it could be something else. You've got all your analytics and log files somewhere that you need to be able to search. You also have big data processing and machine learning that you need to do on all this data. And so we want a way that the data lake can hold all of that data. We can move data in there from other places. But if we choose not to move the data in there, we want to be able to query it wherever it lives, right? And so if we take a look at this sort of strategy with the AWS services pinned on top of it, well, at the heart of the data lake is S3, right? That is our object storage. It's a very cheap, durable place to store any kind of data, which makes it perfect for a data lake. Now, there is a tool called Lake Formation that we add on top of that to help us, set up that data lake and all the permissions and the catalog of metadata and everything. And that kind of comes from Glue, but Lake Formation helps us set it up. And then you've got, relational databases, whether it's RDS or Aurora or, maybe even, well, Redshift is a relational database, but we kind of separate that out as a data warehouse. Then you've got non-relational databases like DynamoDB, and well, the list goes on. There's probably about 8 others. SageMaker is our typical service for doing machine learning type workloads, but we need access to that data in S3. OpenSearch service, or you may remember it as Elasticsearch service. They've changed the name because the company Elastic kind of made some interesting choices with the open source project that angered a lot of people. And AWS said, okay, well, we're going to get off Elastic and go to a truly open source thing called OpenSearch. And that's kind of a theme that we're going to see happen again last year with another open source tool. And so we're going to look at that in what's new. And then, of course, EMR is, our managed service for running Hadoop type stuff, Spark, Hive, Presto, things like that. If we break it down a little bit more, if we look starting at the storage, obviously S3 is kind of our really big storage service, that low cost object storage where we store and retrieve any kind of data from anywhere, right? It's really internet storage. Anybody with the right permissions can, from anywhere on the internet, get and put data into an S3 bucket. It's the basis for anything we back up in AWS goes in there because it's it's low cost and it's not going to lose things, right? It's very durable. It's also a perfect place to store a data lake, right? So that S3 is kind of the heart of analytics in AWS. Another type of storage is EBS. That's your regular kind of disk drives, right? We attach it to an EC2 instance. I could detach it from that instance and move it somewhere else after, but it's typically just, a disk drive for either Windows or Linux. If you want more of shared storage, well, S3 can do that, but it's not like a traditional disk kind of a block level storage. So if that's what you're looking for, well, we also have Elastic File System, or EFS. That's basically an NFS mount that you make that can be shared across a bunch of different EC2 instances. And we also have FSX, which is the X is kind of like there's a whole bunch of different options for file systems. Could be a Windows file server, could be NetApp ONTAP, OpenZFS, Lustre. So there's a few different options for storage, right? But the main one that most people are concerned with in the analytics space is S3. Right? When we talk about databases, our main database is RDS, the Relational Database Service. It's actually a lot of different kinds of databases under the covers. When you go and say, I want to create a database, it says, well, what engine? And they've got 3 different open source options, MySQL, Postgres, and MariaDB. And now they have 3 different commercial databases, Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, and IBM DB2. If you're not familiar, IBM DB2 came in about a year and a half ago. They added that. Of course, the other option, which is very exciting, is Amazon Aurora. Now, you'll get there if you're in the management console and you want to get to Aurora. You won't see it in the list. You got to go to RDS, say create a database, and then you've got those 6 engines plus 2 more. A couple of options for how do you want the compatibility of Aurora. So Aurora is Amazon's own relational database management system. They built it to live in the cloud, but they didn't want people to get vendor lock-in. So they said, okay, it can either look like MySQL or look like Postgres. And what do we mean by look like? Well, what we mean is that it uses that MySQL dialect. It uses the MySQL drivers, right? So for all intents and purposes, if you make an application that's talking to Aurora MySQL, the application thinks it's talking to MySQL, right? So if you ever decide to move that outside of AWS somewhere else, as long as you could figure out how to scale and get the right throughput on MySQL, which is, a lot of work, you could move that application outside of AWS. So it was really to avoid vendor lock-in, right? Which some of those database vendors love, right? And so that's made Amazon Aurora very popular. It's also got some really cool options. They now have a really pretty good serverless option if you don't want to deal with, managing the infrastructure at all. What else do we have? We have Redshift, which is basically a data warehouse. It's a relational database as well. And then we've got the database migration service. And this is a tool that lets us, very quickly and easily say, okay, I've got on-prem, I've got Oracle running on a bunch of physical machines. I want to move that to the cloud. Well, sometimes that's easy, right? If you have a hard cutoff where you can say, stop all the applications, export the data, import it into S3, and then go launch RDS, Oracle, right? So if you're going from apples to apples and you could do a hard cutoff, then loading your data into a database isn't too bad. But what if I'm not doing apples to apples? What if I had Oracle on-prem and now in the cloud, I want to move to Aurora Postgres? Well, there's going to be some schema changes that have to happen. So the database migration service has a schema conversion tool that will look and say, well, here's what your create table commands in Oracle look like. Here's what they would look like in Postgres. And it can even look at your code and try and fix that up. So some interesting stuff. Also, if you can't have a hard cutover, if you're exporting data, but you're still using the original database, you have to do change data capture. Right? You have to capture all the deltas while I'm exporting my data, loading it into the new database. There's still changes happening. So how do I get that kind of change data capture and propagate all those changes into the new database? Well, that's what database migration service does. Then beyond that, we've got lots of non-relational databases. Probably the biggest one that Amazon has is called DynamoDB. It is a key value store. Oops, I forgot to fix that little thing. It's supposed to be key value store. Elasticache is in-memory caching. Originally, it used Memcached or Redis. Now, we're going to see something's changed with Redis, and so now we have another option called Valkey. That's one of our new changes coming. Actually, same thing with down here somewhere, Amazon MemoryDB. Used to be just Redis, now it has Valkey as well. We also have a couple of interesting ones. If you're used to using MongoDB, which is a document style database, you've got a bunch of applications written according to that, and you want to move to the cloud and you don't want to have to manage the infrastructure to run that, document style database because it's distributed across a bunch of machines. I don't want to have to deal with that. I can use DocumentDB with MongoDB compatibility. So I don't have to rewrite my whole application. Same thing if you're used to using Cassandra and you want that wide column store database in the cloud managed, that's what Keyspaces is. Neptune is a graph database. It supports a couple of different standards that people use to talk to graph databases, what is it? What's called the Tinker something, or anyway, there's a couple different standards that graph databases use. Sparkle is the other kind of query language, and so Neptune supports those. We even have a time series database called TimeStream. So there's a lot of different, non-relational database. When we move over to sort of analytics side, a big service we've had for a while now is called Kinesis. And this is a serverless way to collect and process streaming data in real time. Now, Kinesis used to have 3 parts. If you went to Kinesis in the management console, it would then ask, well, which one do you want? Do you want Kinesis data streams? Do you want Firehose? Do you want what's now called Flink? right? And so those are now three separate services. So it's no longer called Kinesis Firehose, it's just called Data Firehose. And it's basically the easiest way to reliably ingest, transform, and deliver that streaming data into either a data lake or a data warehouse or something like that, often without code, right? You just sort of configure, okay, I've got a stream of data. Maybe I've got a bunch of IoT sensors firing every 100 milliseconds, sending me a little bit of JSON. This is what sensor I am, here's what time it is, and here's my readings, right? And so you take those things, and what we do is we sort of aggregate them in Firehose and then write out to an S3 bucket, every once a minute instead of, hundreds of thousands of times per second, right? And so that's the kind of thing that Firehose is good at. And I can do a little bit of transformation on the data. I can change the type, and instead of just going to S3, I can go into Redshift or into, a few different options now. And so it helps you with configuration of that stuff rather than writing a bunch of code. Like a regular Kinesis data stream, you have to write a producer to send the data, I have to write a consumer to grab the data and then do something with it. And then the managed service for Flink says, well, if you have either of those streams and you want to do some sort of analytics on the data as it goes through that stream, like maybe look at the data, transform it, send it somewhere else, we can do that with an Apache project called Flink. And so that lets you do that. Now, if all this kind of, streaming data sounds familiar, you may be used to using something called Kafka, right? Kafka is an Apache project, been around since, it's been a while. It was originally developed at LinkedIn. But it's sort of like on-prem, a lot of people will just go, bring up a bunch of machines and create a cluster of these machines that will hold this streaming data. But it's a lot of management of it. And that's what Kinesis takes out of your hands. But if you already had a bunch of application code written according to the APIs from Kafka, well, then it's a big move to the cloud and say, well, instead of using Kafka, I'm going to use Kinesis. I got to go rewrite all my applications. And so enough people complained that eventually Amazon said, okay, we're going to build something called Managed Streaming for Kafka, or MSK. So it's a fully managed, highly available, and secure Kafka service. So you would use this or Kinesis, probably not both, right? And so that's how we deal with streaming data. What about sort of ETL type stuff? Well, when it comes to ETL, there's sort of the traditional Hadoop route where I'm going to write a lot of code myself. In the old days, we'd use MapReduce, and that's sort of where the EMR name came from. But these days, it's mostly Spark, or there's some newer frameworks as well. But if I need to be able to say, hey, bring up a cluster of 1,000 machines and go run these jobs, I can set up EMR, and it helps me a lot to do that. But the newer way of doing that is to do it in a more serverless way where I'm not thinking about how many servers and how long they're running. I just kind of write that Spark code, or maybe I can configure it and I don't have to write it all from scratch. And I can just pay for how long that cluster gets used. And that's what Glue is. So it's sort of a serverless ETL type tool. Now, separate from Glue is Glue Data Brew, which is more of a visual preparation tool, right? So that ETL, a lot of times what we're doing is cleaning it up, normalizing that data, because we're going to do some data science and machine learning on it. And so Glue Data Brew really helps us do a lot of that cleaning and normalizing, often without any code at all. And then the other one I mentioned was Lake Formation. That's really helped us create and manage a data lake on S3 with centralized access control, and really get it done in a couple hours rather than a few days, which it used to take to set up all the permissions and everything. I guess around querying and searching, Athena is our basic interaction query service. It started as just a way to write SQL queries on data that's well structured in S3, right? So if I got a bunch of like comma delimited files or tab delimited or maybe JSON, something where I could kind of figure out how to map the style of that file to a create table command, and then I could run queries. And instead of paying by the hour for database resources, I just pay for how many terabytes of data am I scanning to get those results, right? But over the years, they added a lot of new features to Athena where I can query not just S3 well-structured files, but I could query Redshift, I could query Aurora, I could query, all kinds of federated data sources using standard SQL. Right? So when we go back to that data strategy where I can query the data wherever it is in any of those kind of options. And then QuickSight is Amazon's kind of version of a BI tool, right? So it looks a little bit like Tableau. If you've ever used Tableau or Power BI or Cognos, it's one of those. It's not the most popular tool in the world, but there are some people who like the idea that I don't have to manage any infrastructure for it because it's in the cloud. Open search service I mentioned is, that way that we search and visualize and analyze petabytes of text and unstructured data, often very, very often for log file type stuff for doing sort of observability. And Data Exchange is kind of a newer service. It's been around for a couple of years now, but they make it easy to find, subscribe to, and use third-party data from a wide range of providers. So they've got all kinds of nice connections that make it really easy to grab that data and use it. Just to round out our services, if we look at machine learning and AI, the main service around that for a long time has been SageMaker, where I can build, train, and deploy ML models at scale. But this is very much for real data scientists to do it. Right? These days, what's become wildly popular is generative AI, where I could maybe even skip over learning all about data science and all the machine learning basics and just say, well, there's all these foundational models that are already out there. I could take them and use them, maybe customize them a little bit, maybe say, well, here, use my data, And so Amazon Bedrock is this fully managed service that helps developers build these AI applications. And they've got hundreds of different foundational models you can choose from all the different industry leading providers and some emerging leaders, if you want to get Claude from Anthropic or, wherever. There are some low cost ones that Amazon's built and trained themselves. And so, depends, your choice of model is going to depend on, what's it good at, but also how much is it going to cost me. Another generative AI service that AWS has is Amazon Q, or you may see it called Amazon Q for Business. But this is an AI-powered assistant to help make data more accessible. You can use it to help write your code, to answer questions, generate content, solve problems, all that kind of stuff. And it's really nicely integrated with everything in the management console, including QuickSight. So these days, business intelligence people are getting to the point where I don't start by grabbing my data and then go making a pie graph or a bar chart or something. I can come in plain English and say what I want, and it'll generate maybe what it thinks is the best kind of way to visualize that data. So it's pretty cool stuff. There's a whole bunch of other machine learning services. Actually, if we take a look at the management console, see there's a very long list of them. So let me find here's the machine learning. So you see SageMaker AI, that's what SageMaker's been renamed. We'll talk about that. But you see all these different ones: Comprehend, Kendra, Personalize, Poly, Recognition, Textract, Transcribe. A lot of these are fully flushed out. So they're tools that Amazon themselves was using internally. And they said, I bet our customers would like this. And so instead of you having to go and figure out how to build image recognition systems and train your own models, you can use the ones that Amazon already has. So they're not geared towards a heavy duty data scientist. They're geared towards everyday developers who don't have a lot of machine learning knowledge. But, I've got, some speech, I got an MP3 of somebody talking and I want to convert that to text. Or I've got text and I want to convert it to somebody talking, right? So text to speech, speech to text, translation, image recognition is, you can say, here's an S3 bucket full of thousands of images, go and index them. And then I want you to find what are all the images that are of a woman wearing sunglasses. And I want you to be 92% sure, right? If you're only 90% sure, I might get more images returned, right? And so there's some really nice stuff in there if you want to, run through the list and figure them all out, right? But, if you're really a heavy duty data scientist, you're probably going to be building your own models, training them on your own data to get exactly what you're looking for. And so you might use SageMaker to do that. All right, so that's our overview. It's a long time for the overview. Now we'll get to what's new. All right, so let's start with S3 because that's where we sort of started with storage. Um, there's a project out there called Apache Iceberg, which allows us to really um, deal with this idea of data in say in S3. I mean, Iceberg is bigger than just AWS or anything like that. But in AWS, say in S3, you've got files and you want to make changes to those files over time. Like S3 is really more of a worm model, write once, read many times. And so when you want to build a data lake and you have new data coming in and you want to figure out, well, is this an update or is it an insert? Is this new data or is that data there and we're just changing it a little bit, right? So Iceberg allows us to do that. And so now they have support for this idea of S3 tables. So these are specifically optimized for analytics workloads. And so now you should get up to 3 times faster query throughput and 10 times higher transactions per second compared to self-managed tables. And so Apache Iceberg is what we typically use when we're setting up that data lake on S3. They also now have something called S3 metadata. It's in preview right now, but what it does is it gives you helps you instantly discover and understand your S3 data with automated, easy queried metadata that updates in near real time. So each of these, I did include the link to where they announced it. But so here it is. So it supports object metadata, system-defined details like size and the source of the object, custom metadata, tags that you use, all that kind of stuff. And it's automatically capturing that from objects as they're uploaded into the bucket. And so you can query that metadata in a read-only table. And as your data in your bucket changes, the metadata updates automatically. And so that's kind of cool, new feature. Right? Couple others. Oops. There's a new default data integrity protection. So they've long done some sort of hashing. Like when you write to S3, you're writing to the first place, and then it copies 2 other copies in other, data centers across that region. And then every time you go to do something, it does some checksum stuff to make sure. Well, now they've increased how they do that data integrity. And so here's the result of it. It now stores a CRC-based whole object checksum in the object metadata, even for multi-part uploads, helps you verify the integrity of the object stored in S3 at any time. So they've always had some like MD5 checksums, but now it supports 5 additional checksum algorithms. And so, it's the best practice for data durability, and it's now the default behavior. So, just a little more at ease with making sure that even as they're moving your data around to make copies of it, it's going to be, verified that they got it right across. Now, a new thing in general availability is something called the storage browser. It's basically like a web app. So if we see this, yeah, you can provide authorized end users such as customers, partners, and employees with access to easily browse, download, and update data in S3 directly from your own application. So they've got different, like they've got JavaScript client libraries that you could use. So you could have end users search through your S3. You could say, well, you're allowed just these buckets to look into. And then they can go and search for the data that they want and grab it. So just makes a nice, like, easy web interface to it, basically. Other storage, if we look at FSx, they now have something called intelligent tiering. You may have heard that term before. That's something that's been in S3 for a long time, right? S3 has different storage tiers. The regular standard storage is, it's pretty cheap. It's like 2.3 cents per gig per month, but you can get and set things pretty quickly. But if you said, well, this data isn't something that I'm accessing very often, I could trade off and say, well, I want to pay less for storage and I'll pay more every time I access it. So if I don't access it very often, I can save a lot of money by moving it to infrequent access tier or, even more extreme to Glacier. And there's different levels within Glacier. Right? And Glacier sort of makes you think slow moving, cold storage, right? But and they have something in S3 allows you to set up a lifecycle policy and say, okay, well, my data, as soon as I generate these log files, I'm going to use them for the first 2 weeks. Then I'll move them into infrequent access for the next 3 months. Then I'll move them into Glacier because I'm probably never going to look at them again. But, I've got some compliance thing that says I need to hold on to them, right? So you can build those policies if you have well-known access patterns. But if I don't know what the access patterns are, I don't know what this data is going to be important and used all the time or not. Well, then you could use intelligent tiering in S3 where it says, oh, I'll leave it in standard storage. After a while, if nobody's using it, I'll move it to infrequent access and maybe even into Glacier. And if you all of a sudden start using it, we'll move it back for you. Right? So we'll move it to the cheapest tier until you decide your access patterns change. Well, now they can do sort of the same thing with FSX. Another thing we have is called the transfer family. This allows us to do, if I have a bunch of data and I move it to S3 over FTP or some kind of secure FTP kind of thing. Now you can enable browser-based transfers for non-technical users. I just need to upload a file to, your organization. I'm not building an application that's going to upload and have to write code to upload it to S3. I just want to give somebody like a browser-based app so that they can upload files over FTP to me. So that's kind of a new transfer family web app. That's a new thing they added. If we switch from storage to databases, there's a lot of stuff that happens in databases. In RDS, they made a lot of fixes to the blue-green deployment so that we can do it in a little bit smoother way. I can move I can make sure that the new version is completely up, ready to go before we switch over. We can even do minor version upgrades while we do it. So there's some cool stuff that they added to the blue-green deployments. Another thing they added is something called CloudWatch Database Insights. So it can look at either RDS or Aurora databases and look at the logs and metrics from your applications, and then basically come back and give you a unified view in the console of what's going on with this database, right? So that's pretty cool. Probably the biggest new thing in Aurora is a new engine, right? So remember we said we had two different compatibilities. We had MySQL and we had Postgres. Well, now they've introduced sort of a new type of Aurora called DSQL. And so back in December, it's still just in preview, but it's a new serverless distributed SQL database with active high availability. So it's really all about, across regions, you have this sort of global database. You want to build always available applications with virtually unlimited scalability, the highest availability, and zero infrastructure management. So serverless, all that. So it's going to provide virtually unlimited horizontal scaling with flexibility to independently scale reads, writes, and compute and storage. And they give us some numbers. It's 4 nines of availability in a single region, and 5 nines of availability if we go multi-region. Right now, it is Postgres compatible, and it's only available in a few regions, but it's sort of a new kind of exciting thing. So it's something to watch out for. Big new moves in Aurora. If we continue on with RDS and Aurora, the compute optimizer, I don't know if you've ever seen this before, but what happens a lot of times is people start by doing a lift and shift of their original application from on-prem, they move it to the cloud, and then after a while they say, well, when I lift and shifted, I just said, what kind of machine is this running on? Let's launch an EC2 instance the exact same size in the cloud. And then they go after, run it in production for a while and then start looking at the history of, well, wow, my CPU never went over 2%. I'm probably paying for more CPU than I need, right? So we have this concept called right sizing, where we say, let's figure out what is the right size of instances and other things so that we get the performance we need and the scale that we need, right? But we're not paying extra, right? And so Compute Optimizer could do that for EC2 for a long time now, but now it can do it for Aurora databases as well. So it's looking at your metrics like CPU, network throughput, database connections, and it's figuring out, hey, what kind of instance am I using for, what kind of instances am I using for this Aurora database, and which should I be using? This other one is a new database thing. Um, Oracle's done this for a while, right? Oracle has their own cloud called OCI, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. And at ExitCertified, we're partnered with all four of the big cloud vendors, right? So not just AWS, but also Azure, Google Cloud, and Oracle Cloud. But when we look at who's using Oracle Cloud, it's mostly people who were heavily Oracle customers. So not just Oracle database, but hard to get off of things like their data warehouse, which is called Exadata, Oracle applications and all that. But OCI is sort of, they know where they are. They're way down in fourth place. Well, actually, maybe even much further than fourth place. And so what they started to do a few years ago was they said, well, let's get together first they started with Azure. They said, well, what if we put OCI components in the same place as an Azure data centers, so that if people wanted to use their Oracle database in OCI, but then run the rest of their application in Azure, we'd have a nice, easy way to talk to them. And then they did it for Google Cloud, and now they've done it for AWS as well. Okay? So it's in limited preview right now, but you're going to be able to access your, say, Exadata infrastructure in OCI within your AWS data center. Not in every region, just in the certain regions where they've partnered up for this. So that's kind of a new thing. And that probably doesn't interest most of you, but AWS has done a lot to say, well, if you want to run Oracle database, we can run Oracle database on EC2, but you may have to use bare metal servers, because they've done some weird licensing things Oracle has. This kind of gets us around all that and says, run Oracle on Oracle's hardware, run the rest of my app in AWS. I mentioned Redshift is our data warehouse. They've fixed up some things with their materialized views, especially if we're trying to do zero ETL integrations. So one of the big things that we found over the years is that ETL is a process that we used to do it like in the old days, say 10 years ago. I worked at a place where, we had an IBM Netezza data warehouse, and we had applications that would run all day generating transactions. And then every night we would do a huge ETL job. It would take all the transactions from the day, take them all, massage them, aggregate them, and then load them into the data warehouse. And, basically every night we had nightly processing that would do this kind of thing. I've worked at other places where, we have to do this ETL job every 4 hours or something. Well, we got to the point where we're generating stuff all the time. We don't have that period of downtime in the middle of the night necessarily where I can do an ETL job. And ideally, I maybe, if the data is already not too bad, I should be able to move it directly into that data warehouse. And so this idea of zero ETL means, maybe I don't even have to write any code. I just take that data map, what's it look like here, what's it look like there, and move the data directly in. And if we're going to use a materialized view, we used to have to manually update those. Now these materialized views can stay up to date, eliminating the need for manual refresh or complex ETL processes. So a little fix there. Another thing that they have in Redshift is this idea called data sharing. If I have a Redshift cluster, I could share that data with other Redshift clusters. And that's been around for a little bit, but you can now start writing to a Redshift database cluster for multiple Redshift data warehouses in just a few clicks. They made it all a lot easier to do. And really what the sum of this is, you can flexibly scale compute by adding data warehouses of different sizes and types based on their right workloads, price, performance needs, and then isolate the compute to more easily meet your workload performance requirements. So you could actually bring up more than one cluster all using the same shared data. And so depending what they need to do, I can bring up a cluster that's got a different kind of storage even, for different kinds of workloads. So it's kind of an interesting one. May not be of interest to you. If we look at DynamoDB, there's a few changes there. They fixed up the global tables in DynamoDB where essentially they have strong consistency in multi-region. So I can make changes in any region and it'll be strongly consistent. So if you've got multi-region apps that want to have a recovery point objective of 0, so if there's a failure, I don't lose anything, that's what we're moving towards there. And so that's in preview right now. They now have a configurable point in time recovery period. So if you've got some sort of compliance that says, hey, if there's a failure, I need to be able to, go back to this point in time, and, I can say exactly like how many seconds. I think, let me show you this one. Yeah, allowing you to restore your data to any second within your recovery period. With this launch, a recoverable backup recovery period can help you meet your compliance and regulatory requirements that necessitate shorter data recovery periods. So ranging from 1 to 35 days. Of course, the longer you do it, the more backups you need to take, and the more stress there is on the DynamoDB table, but and the more you're paying for storage, but you can meet whatever requirement you need for point in time backup recovery. A couple of others, they now have a way to do warm throughput for tables and indexes. So if you wanted to pre-warm your DynamoDB table to handle sort of peak events, like, if there's a couple things here that you need to understand about DynamoDB. With DynamoDB, I can just let it automatically scale to support workloads of any size, right? But when you have a peak event, like a product launch or something like that, request rates can surge 10 or even 100 times in a short period of time. And so, the way it automates the scale, it might not be able to catch up that quickly. And so if you know there's an event coming, you can kind of pre-warm it for a certain amount. Yeah, it provides visibility into the number of read and write operations your table can readily handle. And so that's the pre-warming idea. And another thing that they've done is a big price reduction on on-demand throughput and global tables. So the on-demand was this ability to say, I don't want to have to get my hands dirty. Like, there's really two knobs that you turn when it comes to performance for a DynamoDB table: read capacity units and write capacity units. So I can make a provision table where I tell them I need 100 read capacity units and 10 write capacity units. And that will throttle how much I can do per second, right? And so I can turn those knobs and I can automate it, like, to turn them for me within certain parameters. Or I can just say, I don't want to do the provisioned at all. I'm just going to use on demand and just say, hey, when we're busy, allow it to go bigger, right? And when it's less busy, it'll come in, right? But while that used to be really cost effective for spiky workloads, for workloads that didn't change that much, you could never get the same kind of cost as if you actually went and did the work yourself and figured out how many read and write capacity units I need. Right? So the on-demand was like a little too expensive to do for things that weren't really big and spiky. And now with this change, they basically suggest that, they've reduced it so much that pretty much everything should just be on demand now. That's the default now, instead of provision capacity. Okay? And so that's a good news for us. It's just that, that effort of take away one more thing for me to have to worry about. And only in the most extreme circumstances will I actually go and figure out exactly what do I need, because I know exactly what my application's doing all the time. Some other non-relational things. Remember I mentioned how Elasticache, no, not Elasticache, Elasticsearch, they switched to a newer open source called OpenSearch because the Elastic company was doing some funky stuff. Well, yet another one of these open source companies has decided to get a little less open source, and that's the company Redis Inc. So they were doing the bulk of the updates to the Redis project, but all of a sudden they decided to remove the open source license, pull out of the Redis project, and just say, hey, we're a commercial product now. So all the Redis contributors from different companies banded together and they said, okay, well, we can still we can fork it off. And they moved it to the Linux Foundation as something called the Valkey project. So Valkey is pretty much the same as what Redis was, like, a year ago, but they're still fixing it up. And now Amazon and a bunch of other big companies, there's a whole bunch of companies. Actually, if I go back, if we take a look, this was in April last year that they first started talking about doing this. And they mentioned down here all the different companies and what they're doing. Here, let me blow this up a little bit. I thought they had a list of, who contributes to Valkey? Here it is. So AWS is doing a lot of the work on it, but they're not alone. I thought I had a list here of everybody working on it. No, I must have saw that somewhere else. Sorry. Anyway, so that's an example. And then the other example like that is Terraform. Terraform is a very popular third-party tool that people use to set up their infrastructure. And what we like about it, it's a lot like CloudFormation, but CloudFormation is specifically an AWS tool. Well, what if you're in a multi-cloud situation where you've got some things in Azure, some things in AWS, maybe I got VMware running on-prem, and I've got all these different infrastructures that I have to manage through infrastructure as code. So Terraform, which was created by HashiCorp, was an open source way of doing this. And so all of a sudden, HashiCorp said, well, we're going to add some features and charge for things on Terraform. And so they forked off of that. And now that's OpenTofu. And so OpenTofu is now, it's got its first stable release last year, and it's becoming pretty popular. Ascendient Learning has a class on OpenTofu. We still have our old classes on Terraform as well. But, so this is kind of a thing that's happening. Some of these companies that start around an open source tool, and then eventually they say, no, we want to do some things. We really want to throw our weight around. This is our product. That doesn't sit well with the open source community. And so the community usually fixes that by forking off and making a truly open source thing. So that's what Valkey is. And so now they support Valkey in Elasticache, but also in MemoryDB. MemoryDB also now supports sort of an active multi-region thing, 5 nines of availability. So that's a couple of other new changes in there. A couple of changes to the database migration service. The schema conversion can now use some generative AI to look and make some decisions about how to do things. There's also a little bit of Gen AI somewhere else. Where was it? I thought there was a couple places where they were using Gen AI. There's now data masking where they can use a few different techniques at their disposal to when you move your data into the cloud from on-prem, you can mask some of the data as you load it into RDS. You can even migrate EC2 databases to RDS. So like I've got Oracle running on EC2 and I want to move to RDS Oracle. Really seamless to do that. Glue, they made a new version of Glue 5.0. Whenever they make, every year or so, they make a new, probably every 2 years, they make a new version of Glue, which just has the latest versions of Spark and everything. One of the big changes in SageMaker was Unified Studio, so this sort of hooks up with that. Here's some generative AI upgrades for Spark. Maybe that's where I was thinking. So this one, it can take your Python-based Spark code that you wrote for an older version of Glue and upgrade it. And so it'll upgrade to the new version of Spark. They can also do generative AI troubleshooting. And so you can initiate automated analysis of a failed job with a single click, and it'll go and use some generative AI to tell you what's the problem. Another thing in Glue, they've expanded connectivity with a bunch of new connectors for a bunch of new things so that I can ingest data from all these different places in my Glue ETL job, grab data from, PayPal checkout or Smartsheets or, these are the new ones, but this adds 16 more to the ones that they already had. So there's a lot of places we can grab data automatically in Glue. A couple of changes to the Glue data catalog. This idea of generating statistics. So, if I've got a table of data and it's got, how big are the tables, how unique are the keys, things like that. There's some statistics that you have to generate once in a while so that the cost-based optimizer, when it looks to join table A to B to C, like it knows the relative size of them and how best to join them. It needs up-to-date statistics. Well, now the Glue Data Catalog, it will generate statistics automatically for a new table with one-time catalog configuration. And whenever you make a change to those tables, it'll automatically generate new statistics. It also offers some advanced automatic optimization of iceberg tables. So again, just, increasing that iceberg support throughout. Kinesis data streams. This one, there's a whole bunch of things where Flink, if you're using Apache Flink with the managed service, it now hooks nicely to the data streams. It hooks to a DynamoDB stream. So those are as sources, but it can now deliver to an SQSQ or to Prometheus. There's an Amazon managed service for Prometheus and Grafana, so they can write to those as destinations. So just increasing how useful that Flink is without having to write code to take it and then go put it somewhere. QuickSight, probably the biggest change there is integrating Amazon Q in QuickSight. So I can unify insights from structured and unstructured data. So it can look at your all the different data sources that you use to create your visualizations in QuickSight. And now you can ask plain English questions, and it can marry that data with some other unstructured data and generate some really good stuff. Users can use multi-visual Q&A to ask questions in natural language and then get visualizations back, or vice versa. Plus, they've made a bunch of little fixes to how image and fonts, just trying to make QuickSight a little closer to Tableau. Like when they first launched it, it was very minimal. Amazon throws something out there and sees if anybody's interested, and then if so, then they fix it, right? So they put the minimal in minimal viable product, and so then they, people say, well, I can't fix these images. I can't just embed an image in my dashboard, So now you can do all that kind of stuff. So they did a lot of that, and then finally, it's the big change, I think, is what happened with SageMaker. Essentially, the thing they wanted to do with SageMaker has long been just for data scientists doing, training models and then using models and deploying them, right? What they've decided is that, a lot of times, a big part of the data scientist job is actually getting the data from wherever we need it, centralizing it, cleaning it up, and then training the model and everything on it, right? And so they said, what we really need to do is bring together all our familiar tools from analytics and AI ML services for data processing, SQL analytics, machine learning model development, and the generative AI application development all in one place. And so that's what SageMaker Unified Studio is to be. So that's part of the new next generation of SageMaker, right? Is the Unified Studio. The next part is they introduced something called SageMaker Lakehouse. So if you've heard that word lakehouse, obviously it's kind of a mishmash of the data lake and a data warehouse, right? And so a lot of times you say, okay, well, we need a central data lake. And so people start dropping all their data in a data lake, but we still have need for data warehouses. We still have our other relational databases. So you end up with not just one central place where all the data is. We have all kinds of places. Well, SageMaker Lakehouse says, well, at least for my side of things, the data science part, I'm going to grab all that data and just load it into one place. And so the Lakehouse is going to be unify all your data across maybe one or even multiple S3 data lakes, Redshift data warehouses, and make a single copy of the data all in one place and then work on it there. And then based on Data Zone, they made this thing called SageMaker Data and AI Governance. So it allows your engineers, data scientists, analysts to securely discover and access approved data and models using semantic search with generative AI created metadata. So just a way to say, what are these kinds of roles allowed to look at? What are these kinds of roles allowed to look at? And then let them just go search for the data. Now that we have who's allowed to see what, let's make it easy for them to get that data. But that's not all. It keeps going. What's new in SageMaker? There's now in Data Zone and the next generation of SageMaker, we now have data lineage. So it automatically captures that lineage from Glue and Redshift to visualize the events like from source to consumption, right? And this is compatible with something called Open Lineage, right? And it lets you uh, go in through tools that are Open Lineage enabled. It also lets you use an API, and I can basically see where did this data come from, how to get to where it is. SageMaker Lakehouse and Redshift both support zero ETL integrations from 8 new applications, including Salesforce, SAP, ServiceNow, Zendesk. So I can get that data. I don't have to write code to grab it and massage it and pull it in. Right? It's zero ETL. So it automates the extraction and loading of that data for me. And then same thing with DynamoDB. So if I've got a DynamoDB table and I want to do some sort of analytics on it, I can pull it into my lakehouse without actually having to impact the production workload. I don't have to go and run a bunch of queries on that DynamoDB to pull that data out. Because every time you run queries on it, that's taking some of the, if it's a provisioned table, that's taking some of the read capacity units out of it. So they just zero ETL pull that out. All right. It's a lot, but this is what happens every year right around reInvent. We have a ton of new things going on. I'll show you some of our classes on the ExitCertified site, which will soon be the Ascendient Learning site. If you go to ExitCertified.com, next week you'll get redirected to Ascendient Learning. And the website will look different, but the basic structure will be the same. And just remember, ExitCertified, our part of the company was really the vendor authorized part. So, at its heart, we are very much cloud training company. So AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, Oracle Cloud, and then we've got all these different things around it, right? And so that we call this our cloud centrics diagram. Let me show you here, and just threw into the chat this AWS link. So this takes us to the courses. You'll see lots of courses here. Some essentials for getting started. Usually the one-day tech essentials is where most people start, and then go into, usually the next level is sort of associate level training. Kind of maps to the certifications. You got your architect, operations, or developer. So we have 3-day classes for each of those. And then from there, we've got a lot of different specialized things. So data analytics, this is where we have a bunch of one-day classes, or there is sort of an overview class. It's this one, the Building Modern Data Analytics Solutions on AWS. That's a 4-day class. Talks about the streaming side of things with Kinesis and MSK, talks about EMR, talks about Glue and data lakes, all of that stuff. If you're looking for more of a deep dive into Redshift, we've got a couple options there. We've got a 3-day data warehousing class. We also have the 1-day building data analytics solutions using Redshift. Then we've got all the machine learning and AI classes. This is sort of an exciting new side of things. There's a couple of new certifications. If we go look at the AWS certifications, this will get me there, I think. If you want to look at the certifications now, we have 2 foundational ones, the cloud practitioner that's been there for a while, and then this new AI practitioner, which is maybe not even foundational level. I would say it's almost associate level. It's not really easy in exam. That's a new one. And then at the associate level, we've got the traditional, sysops, developer, or solution architect. Now we've got data engineer and machine learning engineer. So that's an associate level. We have a new 3-day class coming soon that will prepare people for that machine learning engineer. It's still just a brand new cert. The class is coming soon, I think in May. On the professional side, we've had these 2 professional ones for a long time, solution architect, data engineer, and then we've got a few specialty ones, most notably the machine learning specialty. This is still okay. I think it's going to go through some big changes probably sometime this year. So for any of these classes, we do have a pretty good public schedule. So if you look at one of these ones, like say developing Gen AI applications, I don't think we have that many. March 11th, April 14th, May 6th. This is a 2-day class. It runs about once a month, right? If you see it saying GTR, like, so if I go to say one of our classes that runs all the time, like the architecting on AWS class, very popular class, if you see that guaranteed to run, that means if you even just as one person, you go and book into that, it's definitely going to run. Okay? And so you'll see, like the March 5th one's GTR, the March 12th one, not yet. It might be if we get enough people in it, soon. And so any of these classes, if you go to enroll, if you're doing it right now, you could put a promo code in. Now, unfortunately, this promo code's good only until next week sometime, February 28th. So this is our winter promotion. This is the tail end of it, and it's called Frostbite. And I think Ann will put something in there, but let me just click on that. Yeah, I'll put this link into the. This is our promo. So you get 25% off IT training. There are a few like some small print stuff where it doesn't apply. Somewhere they've got, oh, here's our training portfolio. I don't know, somewhere there's some fine print. You have to book by midnight PST, February 28th. If you're doing a learning subscription, it has to be initiated by then. It's not valid for exam or exam vouchers and a few other things that it doesn't apply to. But most of the AWS classes, I think, are probably going to fit right nicely in there. So I think that's about all I wanted to say, which brings us to, just past 2 o'clock. I think that's about all I had. Questions. I'll take questions in the chat if you want. I saw one chat up there. How does the D-SQL compare to the existing global Aurora, which is across 2 regions? This D-SQL it's a whole new way of thinking about global tables. And it's, I think Aurora Global Tables, there were still some limitations because they were trying to make it look like MySQL or Postgres or whatever, so the D-SQL is like it's a different engine under the covers, and it looks like it should be much faster at keeping up, like with the replication between them. And so I think that's the difference. Now, it's in limited preview. I haven't been able to try it yet. So when something's in limited preview, that day a bunch of people go and sign up for it, and then that's it. They stop. So I can't use it. And so I'm waiting until it becomes GA to really investigate a lot more. But I would say, if you've got applications around the world, you got customers around the world, and you need a database that's in sync around the world, it seems very, very promising. So I would keep an eye on it and look for articles on people, not just AWS, but third-party articles on people who have tried it, and give you more of an honest, this is what it's good at, this is what it's not good at. But once it becomes, more GA, then I think you'd have a better sense of how much better is it than the regular global tables. All right. Well, I hope that this was useful, and I imagine for everybody that that registered, Anne will send the recording. I'm going to see if I can maybe get the slides, because on all those, I included the link to the announcement of them. So if I can get a PDF version of these, maybe we'll be able to send those out along with the recording link. So I'll get those slides to you, Anne, to include in that email, and maybe the promo code as well for the if you sign up for a class in the next week. I mean, unfortunately, that's a very short turnaround. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, I'm going to wait a little bit to see if there's any more questions. All right. Well, Ann, thanks for your time. And guess stop my share.
Ah, thank you. Thank you so much, Miles. And thanks for everyone who hung on with us here. Thanks for, yeah, we went a little bit overtime. Appreciate all of you hanging with us. And Miles, thanks for answering the question and doing such a great job explaining all the AWS new stuff and also outlining our certifications and promo and all that you did. Appreciate it.
No problem.
All right, everyone, we will see you at the next one. We'll be having something planned soon and we'll get that out for you. So have a wonderful day, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much. Bye all.